Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily for Tuesday, July 9th, 2019. On today's episode, we're going to have a spoiler-filled discussion about Stranger Things 3. This is Slash Film Editor-in-Chief Peter Sciretta. And joining me on today's podcast is Slash Film Weekend Editor Brad Oman.
Hey, that's me.
Senior Writer Ben Pearson.
Hey, what's going on?
And Writer Chris Evangelista.
Hello, folks.
Okay, so we have all seen Stranger Things 3. If you have not watched this on Netflix, I would say turn off this podcast right now because we're going to go full spoilers and, we're not going to hold back in any way. So there's no reason to listen to this podcast unless you've seen the show. That said, let's all start with our brief thoughts on the season overall. I'll start things off. I will say that I was kind of disappointed with Stranger Things 2. I think we had a spoiler discussion of that a year ago or whenever that aired on the podcast, and so you can hear my gripes about that back then. But I feel like this is definitely a return to form. I feel like this does everything I loved about that first season. It feels like the 80s. It has nods to all the things I loved. It does things in interesting ways. It groups these characters in pairings that just make me happy. It evolves it expands the scope of this world and this town and what's going on in a way that just I don't know. I just really enjoyed this season. I think this might be the only season I actually got emotional during, which we can talk about later. Chris, you wrote a whole huge spoiler review for the site.
Yes.
But can you sum up your thoughts in a minute?
I'm pretty much right there with you. I was not a fan of season 2. I thought season 2 was pretty much a disappointment from top to bottom. There was very little I liked about it. And it kind of got me worried, where I was like, has this show, run its course? But this season is, to me, this is like an 8-hour summer blockbuster. I say that in my review. Like, this feels to me like those, the summer blockbusters I remember from my youth, where they're big and they're kind of dumb, but they're also really fun, and you really care about all the characters. And it was like a breath of fresh air, because I feel like this summer movie season in particular has just been dreadful. I can't remember a worse summer movie season than this. And watching this sort of was like, this is what I've been missing this summer, this sort of entertainment.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm actually surprised that Ben is here, because he, just spent like 24 hours or something like that hiking up a mountain of some sort. Were you watching this on your phone while you were hiking, Ben?
No. My wife and I watched, I think, 6 out of the 8 episodes on the 4th of July, and then we actually watched the remaining 2 at an Airbnb just outside of Yosemite National Park. So we made sure to get our Stranger Things in before we did our big hike, which I'm sure I'll talk about on upcoming water cooler episode.
Well, what did you think?
I also liked this season. I did not really care for Stranger Things 2. I think this is close to a return to form. I still think the first season is just... I maybe wouldn't go as far as to call it like a perfect season of television, but the surprise, the out of nowhere factor of this show just sort of dropping and being as good as it was, and sort of capturing all of these feelings that it captured at the time so well, was so impressive to me. And it's tough to, the show automatically has a target on its back when it comes out of the gate that hot, that strong, to be able to live up to that bar that it set so early. And I think Stranger Things 3 comes close, but doesn't quite clear it for me. But still, this season has felt a lot more focused than the show has felt in the past. And we'll talk about a couple of the little gripes that I have along the way. But I think for the most part, this was a really, really enjoyable 8 episodes of TV.
Yeah. Brad, what did you think?
Yeah, I think that I probably liked Stranger Things season 2 more than a lot of people. Not that I was in love with it. It was definitely a step down from the first season, but I still had fun with it, still enjoyed it for the most part. But comparing it to this new season is definitely infinitely better in a lot of different ways. I just love what it does with the characters, especially when it comes to teaming them up. I love just how the relationships have evolved. I like how the scope of the show keeps getting bigger. This time, the references didn't seem, with the exception of a couple, quite as overt or obvious. I feel like they went in some more interesting directions than they have in previous seasons as far as capturing that nostalgia, even though it's still obviously there. But yeah, it was a breeze going through this. I spread it out over 2 or 3 days, mostly just because my schedule didn't allow me to sit down for 7.5 whatever straight hours to watch the show, and I actually liked spreading it out that way. And even then, it still felt like a breeze going through it. And I especially like how, kind of tying in with what Chris says about it feeling like an 8-hour summer blockbuster, is the episodes don't themselves feel like episodes. It just feels like they happen to be like, okay, we need to cut here, and then the next episode just picks up exactly where we were before.
Yeah, for sure. Let's talk about Starcourt Mall, because I feel like this season really opens up the scope of the show a lot. They're building this mall. The small town stores are going out of business. We have the introduction of this mayor. There's, for some reason, there's Russians involved. But I think Starcourt Mall is like the big, new addition to the season. And I love it because it reminds me of all the malls from my childhood, that Sam Goody and the food court and everything. What do you guys think about the expansion of this, like just expanding the show much bigger than it was in the past 2 seasons?
It's weird to be like, oh, it made me nostalgic because I don't want to make it be like I am nostalgic for consumerism, but it really did make me, feel like, going to the mall when I was a teenager, and, a lot of those stores don't even exist anymore, like, Sam Goody and stuff like that. So it was weird. It made me like just.
But let's be fair. In the 80s and 90s, that's what we were excited for, right?
Yes, and we were wrong to be so. But it definitely brought up that nostalgia. And I also think on another level, it makes the show feel more rooted in the real world. I mean, I know the show has had, product placement since the beginning with Eggos and stuff like that, but seeing like a gap in the background of an episode made this like feel more like it's part of the real world, as unfortunate as that sounds, because it just makes me sound like I'm comparing everything in the real world to consumerism and capitalism. But that's,
By the way, the only thing I would say I feel like they went overboard with was the new Coke. That felt like it was all over the place.
Yeah, I don't, they had like a whole spiel about New Coke where they compared it to John Carpenter's The Thing, which they really could have just cut completely. I feel like they put that in there because I forget the actor's name, but that poor actor who plays Lucas, they never give him anything to do. And they're like, quick, give him a speech about New Coke so he has something to do this season. And unfortunately, that was like his big moment.
What did you guys think of the mall? Ben?
I actually appreciated how it, Chris, you're talking about consumerism. I think a case could be made that this is sort of like having its cake and eating it too a little bit. And like, you could argue that maybe it's like a sly sort of commentary on the dangers of full force American capitalism, because the entire facade of the mall is that it's built on top of this Russian facility, and it's all just an excuse for these Russians who have infiltrated the small town to easily transport goods and whatever, and they have their entire like facility built on top of this thing, and it's just like people are like mindlessly just mindlessly shopping and going about their lives, just like literally on top of their world being potentially taken down from like right below them. So I don't know. I thought that was an interesting way to sort of blend those two storylines. The new villains, like the opening of this season, it opens in Russia, and that we've seen Russians in the show before with Eleven and her like telepathic abilities. We've seen her try to like basically spy on them, and maybe that was part of why she was being experimented on and all of that stuff. But this is like the most overt use of Russians so far in the show by far, and to blend the villains with the mayor and the mall, all it felt like a natural a natural point to bring everything together for me.
Yeah. And I love there's like going back to the mall for a second before we get to the Russians, the Duffer Brothers, who I think directed 3 or 4 of these episodes. One of the episodes they directed was set in the mall, and it was where like all the characters kind of like the stories were intertwined as they're going. It was almost like they had these like one shots where it was connecting all the characters. I just love how that was done. It really kind of, while it's expanding this world, it brings it together. But you mentioned the Russians, and I'm wondering what you guys think of these villains, because we don't really get much insight into why are they there. I mean, obviously they want
to open up the gate to the Upside Down. They couldn't do it in Russia because they have that opening where they failed to do it in Russia. So I think the idea was that they could only do it in Hawkins.
Yeah, but like, what do they want to do with that? I guess they want to weaponize it.
They're evil, Peter. They hate they hate America. That's their motivation. They hate the red, white, and blue.
So you're saying like the 80s movies, we're just generalizing a whole country.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's obviously it's playing off of like Red Dawn is the biggest example, so much so that they even have Dustin reference Red Dawn in the show. But the evil Russians in Red Dawn, there's nothing to those characters. They just invade a small town and start shooting people, and it's not like we get to know them. And I feel like that's what they're going for here. The generic foreign adversary that just immediately scares all Americans.
I will say, so related to the mall and the Russians, how, granted, I don't know how to build tunnels or things of this nature, but how possible or likely is it that, aside from buying the land from the mayor to build the mall and have houses where secret tunnels lead to this underground facility, how likely is it that they would be able to build tunnels that are miles and miles long underground without being noticed somehow? Like, can you actually tunnel underground without doing any like work above ground to make sure like everything is like works properly? I mean, it seems because those tunnels are miles long. That's why they have those the little like industrial golf cart kind of vehicles that they have to drive around in. So I don't know. That was the one thing where I was like, I'm not sure that they could have built this whole facility.
That's an interesting point, especially since last season there were like natural tunnels going on where like Hopper, like underneath the pumpkin patch fields and stuff like that. So I don't know. There's a lot of tunneling going on in Stranger Things.
Yeah, that and, even seeing, Star Wars Galaxy's Edge being built at Disneyland, and that took years to build, just like this. It's not that big. It's not, it doesn't have mile-long tunnels. You do make a good point, Brad. Although, I would say that the code that the Russians were using was pretty poor. Like, I mean, obviously, they were able to figure it out over the course of, like, a day?
Yeah, I think several hours, they said.
Yeah. Let's talk about our heroes for a second here. Let's start with Hopper and Joyce, because I feel like when I was watching the first episode of the show and Hopper is sitting there watching 11 in the bedroom and the door gets shut, and Hopper kind of becomes a jerk for the first couple episodes of the series, and I was not really enjoying him as much as I did in the previous seasons. I have this theory that like most of his stuff in the season obviously is paired with Winona Ryder's character, and she is always, at number 12 out of 10. And I feel like he's acting opposite her, and he's kind of like at a 12 or 13 in the first few episodes of the season. Was anybody else kind of annoyed by Hopper in this season?
I've seen a lot of people complaining about this, and I really don't agree or get it. I don't know. Maybe it's just because of the way I watched it or what, but Hopper has always been a jerk. Like, he's a jerk in the first season. In the first season, he literally is willing to sell out 11. Like, and he only like goes back on that, after he finds her in the woods in the second season. And in the second season, he's a jerk too. He's really always been a jerk. And I think what's happening is when Stranger Things came out originally, David Harbour, the actor, was not really that well known. I mean, he had been around for a long time as this character actor, but I don't think anyone really knew his name like they do now. He wasn't a household name. And since then, David Harbour's presence, especially online, has grown into this like big, cuddly, really nice guy. He just seems like a genuinely nice person. And this is like going to sound like humble bragging, but I got to interview him in person for this season, and he seemed like so nice and warm and, talkative in person. So I feel like people have become so used to the like David Harbour, the nice guy, that when they came back to Stranger Things this season and they picked up with Hopper the jerk, everyone's like, why is Hopper so mean? But he's really always been that way. I also feel like the show does a good job of establishing that he's like he's been traumatized by the last two seasons. Like he has that speech early where he talks about he almost like shot a dog to death because he thought it was one of the demi dogs from season 2. And it's also important to remember this season it takes place over a period of like I think it's like 48 hours, maybe 72 hours. So he's acting like a dick, but he doesn't really have any time to calm down. Like him and Joyce spend like the whole season running around from place to place, and he's worried about 11 and he's worried about Russians. So I think it's understandable that he's acting a little ramped up the way he is this season. And I also feel like that's just part of the character's arc. Like I feel like he has to sort of work his way back into being a quote unquote good man, if he even can be that.
If I had one complaint with Hopper is I feel like, I don't know, his development as a father figure for 11 feels like maybe a little more aggressive and sort of drawn out than it needs to be, because for a girl who obviously grew up in some like very odd captivity and is unfamiliar with normal life in the real world, he's like, again, very much a jerk to her, when I feel like even somebody like that should maybe be a little more understanding. Like, granted, it's a normal thing for fathers to kind of be protective of their daughters, especially when it comes to boys being around like that. And while this is a show set in the 1980s that has become a little bit more of an archaic stereotype, as it's become much more clear that women can be responsible for themselves and don't need protection from a man in order to live their life and that kind of thing. And so if anything, that's what made me more uncomfortable, is just how kind of blind he was to like letting her live her life. And granted, that does become part of his arc, and he comes around to it with that heart-to-heart letter and that kind of thing. But after so much time spent, because it had been a year since that previously, that you would think there would have been maybe a little more change there, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I mean,
I agree that he actually is a terrible father. I mean, he's keeping her cooped up in his cabin, which, part of it is protection, but he's clearly not like homeschooling her. She's getting like no education at all. So she's just like basically hanging out in his cabin all day.
Well, there were some books there that I did notice one specifically that was like using English well or something. Like
all
that.
Right.
And so you do see like how she has learned certain language things, where sometimes she speaks in a little more stilted way about stuff she doesn't understand, but then things she learns from her friends and whatnot, she's a little bit more comfortable speaking about in a fluid way.
For sure. Let's talk about 11 and Mike, their relationship, and obviously that breakup. Ben, what did you think?
I thought this was mostly pretty natural. I thought that, especially Mike's arc, coming to the realization that he did by the end of the season, I thought it was a good excuse to keep, I hesitate to, or one of my pet peeves with shows that start out with ensemble casts that work so perfectly together is the shows, almost without fail, tend to split them up so much. And I just love the original dynamics so much that I want to see more of that. But of course, this is sort of like how shows have to grow and mature and continue to tell stories. So it makes sense that they decided to split them up. I think it actually worked really well because it gave 11 the opportunity to spend time with Max, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but that was like one of my favorite aspects of the season. It also gave Mike the chance to sort of be back with his group of friends and like, you know, have them basically just like being confused and befuddled at like the opposite sex and how everybody reacts and makes decisions and all that stuff. So I think ultimately, because of the way that Mike came around at the end, I think that sort of justified that whole development of their relationship to me.
Yeah, and you're talking about splitting people up. I feel like this is one of the rare shows that had split people up, but have put them in just delightful groupings. Like after last season, everybody wanted to see kind of like a Dustin and Steve spinoff, and the Duffer Brothers obviously took that and ran with it. And they put Dustin with Steve here, and obviously introduced this new character, Robin. What did you guys think?
I think Maya Hawke is incredible in this series. She sounds like Uma Thurman, like in a crazy way. Like I hear the exact same speech patterns in her that you hear in Uma Thurman. But yeah, she was a breath of fresh air. Obviously, Steve and Dustin together were incredible already, but adding her into the mix made it that much more fun. I just love how she was just endlessly, giving Steve shit and just is this dry, sarcastic personality. But I also love what they do with her character as far as her romantic entanglement, if you will, because initially it seems like they're setting her and Steve up to be this pairing, and then they give you, that kind of twist where she's not into him in that way, which I loved. I love that, we have this character this whole time, and that, you have this assumption about her, and then they turned it on its head, and it made for this nice, touching moment between those two. But yeah,
she's not just into him. She's not into anybody from his sex.
Right.
Yes.
But yeah, that like Ben said, with as much I love Max and Eleven being together, but otherwise, Steve and Dustin and Robin were definitely my favorite team from this season.
Yeah, I feel like that was my favorite segments with everything with them. Chris, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to agree. And I was going to say, one of the things I did not like about season 2 was the new characters. I didn't care about Max. I didn't care about Billy at all. And not only does this season make them more interesting, it introduces Robin and makes her really interesting. And I don't know if it's just because Maya Hawke is like a better actor than the people playing Max and Billy. No offense to them, they're fine, but she's clearly, I think she's like on a different level as far as her talent goes. And I don't know, just Robin was instantly interesting to me in ways that Max and Billy were not. So I'm really happy that she's still on the show, and I hope they keep using her for the future seasons.
I brought up that Robin twist, but there is a moment with Will who's doesn't understand why everybody is getting in these relationships, and I forget exactly what he says, but it's leading a lot of people online to speculate, is Will also gay? I wanted to...
Yeah, I think Mike says something like, "It's not my fault that you don't like girls," or something like that. And yeah, in the moment you can kind of read that as like that he doesn't have interest in them right at this very second, or yeah, I guess you can read that as, because he immediately apologizes, and it's like, is he apologizing for a larger thing, like the fact that Will is gay, or is he just apologizing for, being heated in the moment? That's an interesting thing. What was your read on that, Peter?
Well, I had a weird occurrence where I saw this show a few days after it came out. And, we run a website, and I read a lot of feeds, and I think I saw a headline about something about a, gay twist of some kind. So when that moment came up, I was like, oh, this is it. And I was like, oh, that was a little subtle. I wonder if they're going to... So I think I experienced it in a way that you're probably not supposed to experience it. But what did you think, Chris?
I do think they do it in a way that it's up for interpretation. I think the actor who plays Will did an interview recently where he even said is up for interpretation. A part of me wishes they would just come out and say it, because I think it would be a lot more interesting to just be like, yes, Will is gay. But at the same time, if they want to leave it up in interpretation, it's played in that way.
Is it Will and Lucas who get the short shaft in the season?
It's definitely Lucas. I feel like Will has a bit of an arc here in that, he's upset that his friends are growing up and he's, doesn't really want to grow up. So he at least has that. Lucas, I mean, he gets some fun stuff with Max. And, I do like their sort of like relationship where, he talks about how she broke up with him like 5 times and stuff like that. And the actor is fine. He does the best he can with what he has. But like Lucas's sister Erica gets more to do this season than he does, which is, I understand why, because that actress is a scene stealer. Everyone loved her in season 2. I do think giving her a lot more to do this season is full blown like fan service. Like they really didn't have to do that. And while I didn't mind it like every time she showed up and had all these sassy lines, as funny as they were, it was like, oh, they're literally doing this just because of fan service. So I feel a little bad for Lucas. Give him something to do. He was there for the beginning, and they don't let him do anything.
Yeah, I do think that slingshot, and that's it.
I mean, he did have the idea for the fireworks, and he does have the coolest shirt of the entire season, that Japanese style Karate Kid shirt.
That's true. I forgot about the fireworks, actually. So, yeah, he does have that idea. So, score 1 for Lucas.
Let's talk about 11 and Max, because they kind of they pair up for a significant part of the season. What did you guys think of that?
It was the best, man. I mean, just seeing 11, being under the control of all of these men for the first 2 seasons. Yes, she breaks off in season 2 in that one episode to go visit, I think it's her sister or, a fellow experimentee, I guess. I don't remember the exact relationship there because I've tried to burn that episode from my brain because I hated it so much.
By the way, is that the worst episode in Stranger Things history?
Thus far, easily, yes, by far, yeah. I think, yeah.
Without a doubt.
But it was just so great to see, and obviously, so, with the experimentation and all of that, and then in season 2, she was very much under Hopper's protective wing, like suffocatingly so. And then to see her in season 3 finally get the chance to connect with another woman, and there was that moment in a previous season, season 2, where Elle looks in through I think it's the gym door of the school and gets jealous, thinking that Max and Mike are, being romantic in some way, and she like uses her powers to make Max slip on a skateboard or something. So to see that relationship evolve and for her to just like team up with and sort of like get an education that none of the men in her life have ever been able to give her about, living life and just doing your thing and finding your own style and all that stuff. It was just great to see her sort of fly free for once.
Can we talk about probably, I think the worst subplot of the season, in my opinion, is Nancy and Jonathan, the whole newspaper story. Like, yes. It feels so not connected to everything. It just doesn't seem believable. What did you think, Chris?
Yeah, well, in my spoiler review, this is the thing I highlight the most as the least successful part of the season. Again, it's not the actors' fault. I like those 2 actors. I think, they have their own special set of skills, and I'm not against having more of them, but this subplot did not work for me, and it feels like it didn't work for the show either because they just feel like drop it like before, like sort of halfway. It's really half-assed the way they do it. Like they set up those newspaper guys and they're, like they're all jerks and they're all laughing at her all the time. And then like, I'm pretty sure they all just die. Like they all just turn into parts of the Mind Flayer. So it's like, oh, all right. Well, that went literally nowhere. Like it was so weird to me that they cast like Jake Busey, who, while he's not like famous, people know who he is. And he has like, I think he has like 2 lines and then he turns into a zombie and then dies. It's like, why even waste that part on him? Like what a nothing part that was. And I just, I did not care for this subplot at all. It also didn't really seem believable to me. And I feel like talking about believability is silly with the show because it's so fantastical to begin with. But this idea that Nancy was like, I'm going to be a star reporter immediately. Like, it just seems like that character wouldn't think like that. Like she'd be smarter than to think like, I'm gonna break a big scoop and they're gonna all love me. Like it just seems like she'd be more intelligent than that in my mind.
It's the thing that felt the most 2019 forced into a 1985 setting for me in the whole show. It sort of felt like I don't know. It was like the Duffer Brothers were trying to make some sort of, to take like a feminist swing, and like I appreciate the messaging that they're trying to get across there, but it just didn't feel like it worked in the context of this world that they've set up. And then also it didn't even really pay off in a satisfying way, because the very end of the show, you've got that one like weird ass news report that has all those bizarre graphics and stuff, like
the Inside Edition news report.
Yeah. But and so early in the season, Nancy has this conversation with her mom when she gets fired. Like the mom's like, go out and sell this story to the Indianapolis Star, and make those guys regret passing, not taking you seriously, basically. So like the natural payoff would be that she does that she's the one who gets to tell this story because she was tracking it over the course of the whole season. But then you get this sort of like anonymous report at the end where it's like, who are these people? I mean, I guess like it was the mall explosion and all that stuff was a big enough thing to draw in national news, but Nancy just sort of gets sidelined in all that. So it just really feels like they just sort of like started something and then couldn't bring it across the finish line in a satisfying way there. Yeah,
why wouldn't she be part of that whole, like, she was part of everything. Why wouldn't she be used in those investigative reporting? Like, it feels like that would be the natural arc to all that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I didn't even think about that until you brought that up. That's irritating. Okay, let's talk about the bad guys of the season. I guess let's start with the Mind Flayer and the rules of the evil in the season, because like kind of the rules of the Upside Down and what's coming out of the Upside Down have kind of evolved over the course of this series. And I wondered what you guys think, because I feel like the Mind Flayer, we really don't know a lot about the Mind Flayer. Like I guess they are doing this kind of like invasion of the body snatchers kind of thing in this season. Chris, what did you think?
Just of the character overall?
Yeah, just having this, like, what do you think of, like, I feel like they did not set up the rules well enough. But I
guess at the same time, I feel like they never really told us the rules, so they can sort of get away with it. I mean, the Mind Flayer took over Will last season, so it is established that he can take people over. And, I mean, I liked it because it gave the villain, quote unquote, a personality by, having him talk through Billy. Because, the Demogorgon in season 1, obviously, there's nothing to that quote unquote character. It's just a monster. And season 2 was sort of like all over the place. So I kind of appreciated this. This gave the big bad an actual personality. It made him more of a presence. And this show, it's like the villains are like the least interesting part for me. I really just like watching the characters just sort of like hang out and be friends. And, obviously there needs to be conflict, but it's low on my totem pole of what I care about.
But there was also this thing like where in the Upside Down, we were seeing doppelgangers of these characters, almost kind of like us. Like, what was going on there?
What do you mean?
Doesn't Billy come in contact with his own self in the Upside Down?
Oh yeah, that is that early, and I don't know what the hell that was about, honestly. I just think that's just a way of like the Mind Flayer like screwing with his head, I guess. I don't know what else it could be, honestly. I'm
kind of wondering if that's a setup for us to explore dead characters in season 4 in some way.
I honestly think that was just what the Mind Flayer was doing inside Billy's head, because by that point he was already inside Billy's body. So I think that was just his way of visualizing himself and like what he intended to do, and showing him that that he needed him to create this army of people that would help form his body and that kind of thing.
Am I the only one here that didn't like Evil Billy in this season?
Oh, I thought he was good. I liked Evil Billy. I liked him more this season than last season, where he just seemed like a generic sociopath. Like he was just crazy for no reason, and I liked that. I mean, actually, like they gave him like an actual sympathetic backstory here. Like you see that thing where he's he has that abusive childhood, and it makes you actually care about him a little bit more, and makes his his death at the end actually matter. Because otherwise, if they had just kept him as is, it would be like, who cares if he's dying? I do think the show cheats a little with its characterizations of Billy and Max, because season 2, like, she didn't care about him at all, and understandably so, because he's crazy. And this season, she's a lot more concerned with him. And, you know, granted, she's not a lunatic, so it would make sense that she would care a little bit about him as a person, but she seems like way too wrapped up in his welfare compared to how she felt about him in season 2. And I feel like that's just the writers cutting corners and being like, all right, season 2 didn't work. Let's just ignore that stupid stuff.
Yeah, I think that's trying to like up the sympathy factor for his eventual death. And I mean, Peter, like, he didn't work for you. I guess he didn't work for me in that I didn't really feel the emotional gut punch that they probably wanted me to feel during that death scene, if that's what you mean. But like, you know, because the first time that Elle wakes up on that beach and you start to see the flashbacks of Billy, I'm like, oh no. My wife and I were like, are they going to try to make us feel sad when Billy dies? Because it's not going to work, because we just don't really care about this character very much. But then they actually, you know, they go back into that and show more of the flashbacks, I think, in a later episode. And, you know, they try. It just seemed like a little half-hearted of an effort to sort of humanize this guy a little bit after him being such a monster in the second season. But I don't know, Brad, what did you make of Billy?
Yeah, I'm kind of right there with you. It was I did like what they did with it, and I didn't cry or anything when Billy died, but like I did, you know, feel like, oh, that, you know, that is sad, because obviously he was an asshole because of the shitty life he had, because of his dickhead dad, and, you know, his mom being away from him and that kind of thing. And so the jump from trash Efron to this, you know, sympathetic character is a little bit of a big leap, but I think they did the best with, you know, the time they had that they could dedicate to it.
Yeah, I think I just didn't buy emotionally that whole beat at the end when he dies. And I also, I think that his death kind of undercuts Hopper's death at that moment. Like he's the one that we should be caring about, and they're, you know, intercutting between them. And also, I just have there's certain things I hate in movies. And one of the things I hate is like when they feel the need that they need to create a human version of the villain to, you know, either represent the evil. And it, like, I feel like the evil in Stranger Things as a franchise is cool enough and doesn't really need that human villain on that side of things. Like, I'm fine with the human villain, like the Terminator Russian. Let's talk about the Terminator Russian, because I kind of love the Terminator Russian, and I feel like once he entered the picture, that's when Hopper, I finally warmed up to what they were doing with Hopper in this season. What did you guys think? Like, I feel like this is something that could have been so over the top and people could have hated, but I feel like it was just so delightful.
I think on the exact opposite end of the spectrum as you, just because I just wouldn't call this delightful. It's just like a nothing character. He's just like a guy, and like there's no, you know, the Terminator had the actual Terminator is has such a sense of menace to him, and like there's this almost supernatural element of like, he will not stop ever until you are dead. You know, it's just like this, it chills you to the bone. And this guy is just like a guy who kind of vaguely resembles Arnold Schwarzenegger, who's just wandering around and, you know, shooting Alexei in the chest in a public venue. But
I think that's what I liked about it. It was just so kind of over the top and ridiculous, but I was like, oh yeah, I want to see Hopper being chased by a Russian Terminator.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I thought it was fine, I guess. I don't know. It was okay. But Chris, Brad, any thoughts on Terminator Russian?
I was indifferent. I mean, I liked what they were going for. I don't think like the character was that memorable. I know I liked his death. I liked when Hopper kicked him into that thing. But beyond that, I wouldn't say like I was like, you know, what a great villain. I was neutral.
Yeah, I feel like they did a good job of recalling the idea of these very generic Russian henchman, bounty hunter type villains. And that character I didn't think really need to have much more depth to him than just having a vague resemblance to some of the 80s, you know, action stars.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's talk about the other human villain here, Mayor Kline. This is one that I really didn't enjoy as much, but I do like that they at least tried to give a reasoning for, you know, the politics of how Starcourt Mall came to be and how the Russians were kind of taking over the small town. What did you guys think?
I liked the mayor. I mean, I liked it as a very obvious callback to Jaws, and I also liked it because it makes sense that this town where all this really shitty stuff is going on would have like a corrupt mayor. Like I liked that as sort of like, a non-explanation of like, boy, all this really weird, awful stuff keeps happening in Hawkins. I wonder why no one really notices. And, there's your reason. Like, the people in charge, the government are corrupt and don't really give a crap. And, I kind of liked that not so subtle explanation.
I also love that it's Cary Elwes playing him, and especially in a weird way too, because I don't know if anybody else has ever felt this, but I've always felt like Cary Elwes and Matthew Modine are like stepbrothers or half brothers. I've always felt like they're very similar to each other in the way they carry themselves. And it's funny to me that they're both now bad guys in this series.
Yeah. Wait, Chris, you mentioned that that's a reference to Jaws. I know you did an article listing every single Stranger Things reference and Easter egg. Did you get them all?
I'm sure I did not. I actually didn't put every in the title. That was our editor, Jacob Hall, because that gets more eyes on the article, and I understand why. But I would never be so presumptuous as to say I got them all. But I did get a lot. I kept like a note open on my phone while watching the show, and I wrote down literally every single thing I picked up on, and I got a lot. It's a pretty big list.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the show notes if you want to check that out. But what is some of your favorite, like some of the more deeper dives that people might not notice?
There's a lot in here. There's some stuff where I'm not even sure if I'm correct, but some of the more subtle things I liked was there's that one scene where they're where Steve, Dustin, and Robin they learn the Russians are in the mall because of that merry-go-round plays a song, and that song is it's Daisy, which is of course the song that HAL 9000 sings when he's being shut down in 2001: A Space Odyssey. There's one where I'm not 100% sure I'm right, but I think I am, where Eleven, when she goes to the house of the editor and his daughter who's possessed by the Mind Flayer. She goes to this house, and it's this big white house with a big red door. And the address of the house is 1438. And that immediately made me think of the Nightmare on Elm Street house, because it looks exactly the same. And the address of the Nightmare on Elm Street house is 1428. And those numbers are, while not the same, they're way too close for my opinion to not be a reference. Otherwise, it would be like a really big coincidence if otherwise. And there's like little throwaway lines. Like there's a part where the Russian says to Hopper, "You're a policeman. Policemen have rules," which is literally a line from Die Hard. And there was just stuff like that I really enjoyed picking up on as it unfolded.
What did you think of the guys going to see Back to the Future?
I like that whole sequence. I like because of the acting with the characters, how they're just, obviously they're stoned, but they're just completely befuddled about what they're watching, especially because they come in like at the midpoint of the movie. Yeah. So I thought that was fun.
And I also love how that sequence is edited when they're on the walkie-talkies and they use the actual score cue from Back to the Future, but when Doc and Marty are like communicating.
Yeah, they use the Elvin Silvestri score, which is actually kind of funny. I played the episode before that. I played click on next episode, and somehow it started the episode during that scene and not at the beginning of the episode. I don't know if someone has my Netflix password or what's going on, but we watched a good 5 minutes before we were like, oh, we missed the beginning of this episode. But the minute he was on the walkie-talkies and the first like little music cue in the background from Back to the Future played, I was like, wait, are they still going to score from Back to the Future? So I immediately knew. But okay, let's talk about the bloody gore, because I feel like this season takes that up a bit, especially with some of the slicing into bodies and stuff like that. I was kind of surprised that how far they went with that kind of stuff, especially since this is a very popular thing that's very accessible and watched. It's probably the biggest thing in pop culture this year. Wait, is this bigger than Game of Thrones? What do you guys think?
It's definitely not bigger than Avengers Endgame.
or Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker.
But yeah, but you're talking about money wise. If we were to divide, Avengers Endgame made what, like?
No, I'm not just talking about money wise. I'm talking about everything. The Stranger Things 3 is in no way bigger than Avengers Endgame. I would say it's probably the biggest thing that Netflix has going on.
Wait, okay, I'm going to do the math here. Avengers Endgame has made how much money?
The math doesn't matter. It's
$2.7 billion. I'm doing the math here, Brad.
Oh my god.
$2.7 billion, right? And if we divide that by how much is the average ticket price? It's like $10.
Sure.
So that's 270 million. Okay, yeah, you're right. It's much bigger. Never mind.
But even I mean, the numbers don't really work like that. But besides that, because
like something like 40 million people watched this in the first 4 days or something like that. Watch Stranger Things. So.
But the full impact of Avengers Endgame, just as a pop culture imprint, is even bigger than Stranger Things 3. So, I mean...
Yeah. No, you were right, for sure. But is this bigger than Game of Thrones?
No, Peter. You're insane. What are you talking about?
19 million people watched Game of Thrones finale in the first 24 hours. 40 million people watched this series in the first 4 days.
Yeah, but 19 million people. So those are Netflix numbers that they're giving, and we don't have any sort of confirmation about that. And that 19 million number is just official HBO sources, and Game of Thrones is the most pirated show in the entire world.
So basically you're saying we can't compare what HBO is claiming up against what Netflix is claiming?
Well, I mean, you can compare what HBO is claiming, but then you also have to factor in all of the piracy stuff that you don't have to really factor in with Netflix.
But you don't think there's Netflix piracy?
Not really. Probably. I mean, not the same way.
Not nearly as much. Yeah.
There absolutely is Netflix piracy, though.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people don't have Netflix, believe it or not.
Yeah. People aren't willing to spend even, what is it, like $13 or... I don't know.
It might be less than that for like the basic streaming plan, but yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. We got distracted here by pop culture influence. But let's talk about the gore. Chris, talk about the gore.
It definitely was ramped up. Even the action was ramped up. Like that big fight between the first one between Billy and 11 is. I was surprised at how brutal that was, especially because she's like a kid and she's getting like thrown around. But a part of me thinks that that's sort of like commenting on just the 80s movie landscape as a whole, where eventually they needed to develop the PG-13 rating because they kept pushing boundaries with certain films and getting films that were originally thought of as for general audiences were getting gorier and nastier and scarier, and they had to develop a whole new rating for that. And I kind of wonder if that's what they were going for here. They're trying to show as time goes on, as the 80s march on, things get more graphic and boundary pushing.
And let's talk about Dustin and Suzie. I feel like, when Dustin comes back from camp and talks about Suzie, no one believes him, even though like he's building this like big radio tower on the hill to communicate with her. And at the end of the show, she appears, he gets in contact with her to get that number, which is a passcode to the vault. And she makes him sing this duet to Never Ending Story. How great was this, guys? It was like during the most climactic moment of this, the season, and it just breaks out into like this, 2 or 3 minute long musical moment.
Yeah, first of all, and also let me say that somebody who writes for Stranger Things has been listening to Slash Film Daily, because I feel very seen as far as Dustin is concerned, because I too have a Mormon girlfriend who lives in Utah. And some of my friends thought that I was making her up. I laughed so much at that. But yeah, it's so funny. I actually went back and forth while I was watching the scene between thinking that it was hilarious to thinking, okay, this has gone on too long, and then going back to, okay, this is pretty great that it's going on this long.
Ben, what did you think?
I just thought it was kind of great that Suzie served as like the actual internet before there was an internet for them. Like they could have just easily looked up whatever that mathematical number was if they had access to something, but they just had to call up Suzie and she knows everything.
What did we think of the quick subplot of Mrs. Wheeler and Billy? I know that was continued on from season 2, but it felt almost unnecessary.
Yeah, they could have. I feel like they could have cut that completely. I mean, it gives that actress more to do because she's part of the main cast, but they didn't need that.
Yeah, it almost feels like it's like a very small way of them representing of like just in addition to the overall evil and darkness that comes from the Upside Down. I guess that side of 80s culture of like suburbia seeming like it's this wholesome, everything's cool here, nice neighborhood kind of thing, but really like the families are depressed and broken and unhappy with their lives, and you kind of get that vibe with her being unhappy with her husband, but then eventually kind of comes back around to it, like where like when they're at like the fair and stuff with their daughter kind of thing. I don't know, and it seems weird to me that like the father has been kind of shoved aside. Because he was around a pretty decent amount in the first season, and now he's just kind of there sleeping in a chair.
Yeah, I wonder what the deal is with that. Okay, let's get to the ending here. I guess let's start with let's start with Elle and them taking away her powers. Like I was kind of wondering when everything was coming to a head, when we were gearing up for the last 2 episodes, I was like, Elle has now come into her powers and kind of come into her own strength, and there's no men holding her back and whatever. And I'm like, but now like she is so evolved that like this is going to be easy. Her versus the Mind Flayer is going to be easy. And then they do the brilliant, bait and switch of actually taking away her powers, at least temporarily, maybe permanently. What did you guys think of that?
I'm not 100% sold on it. I feel like that's like the lazy way of writing it. I feel like that's the same problem Marvel had with Captain Marvel, and that like, oh, she's so powerful. How are we going to handle this? We'll take away her powers, or we'll limit her powers. And I get why they do it, and it'll definitely give that character a whole new perspective for season 4. But I don't know how I feel about it, honestly.
Do you think? Well, do you think she's going to get her? I mean, who here doesn't think that she's going to get her powers back in the next season? So we all just assumed that she's going to have her powers.
It's a given.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's talk about Hopper's death and what that does. Where does that leave Elle? I mean, she's now with
the Wheelers.
Yeah. So like,
or the buyers.
Or buyers.
Sorry. Yeah.
And the buyers are moving.
Right.
Far, are they moving? Do we know where they're moving to?
I forget. I don't know if they say or not, but it doesn't seem like it's that far, because they sort of imply that, he says like, you can visit us for Thanksgiving. I mean, granted, you could get on like a plane to do that, but just the way they present it doesn't seem like it's like across the world. It just seems like it's not in town.
Yeah, and I think the actor that plays Will has alluded to, and this could just be his own assumptions and not him actually knowing anything, but that the next season will have him and that whole crew kind of off on their own because they're living someplace else. But obviously there could be a reason, there could be a Thanksgiving, there could be whatever to bring them back to town. I assume that this story is still going to have to take place in Hawkins, right? Like, the entrance to the you need to be there, but I guess there's so many government, all the eyes around the world now because of this news reporter are looking at the small town in Indiana. So like, how do you do that?
Well, I mean, they also have like the Russian connection now. I mean, because we're talking about Hopper here, and we all know he's not actually dead. We all know that's him behind the door in that post-credit scene. So I'm guessing season 4 is going to be partially about him.
Wait, explain what happens in this post-credit scene, because some people might have even missed this.
Okay, so obviously the show makes it look like Hopper has died, and it's a big emotional thing, even though we all know there's no way he could be dead because they're not going to get rid of David Harbour. But there's this post-credit scene in Russia. It's at this secret base, and there's these two Russian guards, and they're walking by all these like prison cells with these solid doors that we can't see through. And one of the guards goes for a door, and the other guard stops him and says, "No, not the American." And then they pull some poor Russian guy out of another cell, and they feed him to the Demogorgon, who is alive again and back and in Russia. So, my assumption is at least a part of season 4 is going to be about, Hopper escaping and getting back to America. Where that leaves the kids, I don't know. I don't know if they're going to like infiltrate Russia to get him back or something like that, but I'm assuming that's going to be somewhat part of the plot.
I hope they bring Murray along, because watching him react to the kids was a really great joy for me this season, when in season 2, I didn't really care for that character that much. I thought his dynamic with, when Erica is talking to him and he's like, why is this 4-year-old talking to? I don't know. There was something about his sort of put upon nature this season and his friendship with Alexei that made him much more endearing to me. So I would love it if they, try to, grab him, jump on a plane, and head over to Russia to try to break Hopper out of that Russian prison facility.
I have loved Brett Gelman on this series since season 2. I actually thought he was one of the best parts of season 2, and he is awesome in this season. I was so hoping that he wasn't just going to be a small part, and the fact that he's such an integral character in the second half of the season was so much fun to me, and especially during their like little heist on the Russian facility, his exasperation with the kids over the walkie-talkies when they keep calling him Bald Eagle. It's just so good. I love Brett Gelman in this show.
So do we all think that Hopper is the American? Is that the theory?
Yeah, he's got to be, because the only other option is that he's still in the Upside Down, and he can't stay there for long without incurring some serious risks to his health.
Well, there's actually some other options too, and HT has an article I'll link in the show notes with some Stranger Things fan theories there. But what were you going to say, Chris?
Oh, I was going to say, when I interviewed David Harbour, he sort of slipped up and literally told me that's him behind the door. And he actually, like, the Netflix rep pulled me aside after the interview and was like, please don't put that in your interview. And I was like, all right, I won't. So, he more or less told me, that's him behind the door.
Wow.
I mean, everybody knows that. Come on.
Yeah, it's not like it's not going to be a shocking twist. At this point, I actually feel like they are going to change just because everyone knows at this point. So they're going to be like, all right, we need to think of something else because everyone already knows what's going on here.
But how do you explain him surviving that? Like, it didn't seem like anybody could have survived that.
He jumped into the Upside Down because the gate was still partially open. And I think that there's a reason why there's a highlight of the keep the door open 3 inches. But he clearly jumped to the Upside Down, and he came out through the Russian gate. And so that's why the Russians have him now.
I didn't even think about that. Okay, so he's the American. He's going to be back. What are the Russians doing with the Demogorgon?
They're going to make him their prime minister, and he's going to turn into Vladimir Putin and hack America's election. It's all leading up to that.
And Chris has been immediately killed.
But like,
I mean, I feel like it's the same kind of thing that any like movie where the Russians are villains. They're just trying to do things that are dastardly as a way to hopefully stick it to America. Like they think that they can use the Upside Down and the Demogorgon and whatever else is in there to their advantage as like a weapon or something like that.
I have a dumb question that I want to ask you guys. That you posing this question I just thought about this. I have not rewatched the season 1 since it came out. But at the very end of season 1, 11 is in the school, I think, and she like blasts the Demogorgon into a wall, and she disappears, and there's sort of a cliffhanger there. Do we see the Demogorgon's body there, or could that Demogorgon have theoretically been, I don't know, like psionically blasted through some sort of portal, and the Russian one that we're seeing here is the same one that we're seeing that we saw in season 1, or is this a different Demogorgon?
I assume that it was a different one because I feel like the Demogorgon isn't like the Demogorgon. It's just a Demogorgon.
See, I assume that too, but when I got the screeners for season 4 or 3, Netflix sent me this huge list of things not to put in my review. Like, don't give away spoilers. And the last one was literally, please don't mention the return of the Demogorgon. So them writing that makes me think it's supposed to be.
That's interesting.
The same one. I don't know how that works.
The Demogorgon could be like, don't mention the return of bears. Do you know what I mean? It's like,
that's just the name. Like, don't mention the return of moose. There are moose that come back.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just wondering, like, what is season 4 going to be? Because we've heard from the Duffer Brothers that season 4 will likely be the last of this franchise. And it's funny, like, this season, you honestly could, just like the first season, you honestly could end the series with that first season, and I feel like you could end it here, like the buyers moving away and everything. It does feel like an ending of sorts, even though it does leave things open for more and tease more. I guess the first season does that too with Will, right? So, but what do you guys think season 4 is going to be? Like, if the Russians have a Demogorgon, I feel like the Demogorgon is such a small stakes villain at this point, because, we've encountered these huge monsters from the Upside Down, and he's so small, but I do like that they're bringing it back to him. Maybe there's a way that maybe season 4 is, I'm just spitballing out loud, and as it's going on in my head, I'm already like, this is a bad idea, but maybe it's like the Russians find a way to weaponize the Demogorgon, so it's not just these kids against this creature from the Upside Down, but it's them against the Russians controlling this creature in some way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds like it sounds plausible. It seems like that's what they're trying to do based on what limited information we're given about them keeping it satiated by feeding random Russian prisoners to it. So I don't know, maybe they are trying to domesticate it or control it in some way. It'll be like that Jurassic Park movie that was never ultimately made, where all the raptors were turned into, I don't know, laser gun toting weapons that were controlled by the government or whatever. I mean, some of those ideas were used in Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom, but not to the ridiculous degree that they were in that spec script that never got made.
Yeah, it was, as I was saying it, that was the idea that was coming into my head, was that abandoned Jurassic Park script.
Let's not forget, too, that at the end of the last episode, Paul Reiser came back briefly, and him and his American squad went into the room where the gate had been opened again, and we're kind of left with him just staring at it and not really sure what they're going to do about that.
Oh, yeah, maybe they'll be able to facilitate the teleporting to help Hopper out of the prison or something.
Or maybe it'll be the kids with Paul. I don't know. I really don't know what season 4 is going to be, but it'll be interesting. Do you think, Chris, and do you want? I already know the answer to this. So this is a leading question, but do you think they'll explain the Upside Down in season 4, and would you want that?
Oh God, no! Please don't do that. No further explanations are needed. All I know is by the time season 4 rolls around, those kids are going to look like they're in their 40s, so they could probably just get away with doing. I'm guessing they're going to have to do some sort of like time jump, because this season alone, those kids look so much older. Even especially like a year has passed between seasons, but they look so much older than the previous season that I can only assume they're going to do some sort of like bigger time jump, like 5 years have gone by or something like that. That's the only thing I could think of to explain how it was
crazy. It was crazy when they did that flashback to the first season, showing them, and they all look like the tiniest children, and it's been like 3 years since then, and now they look like these grown men. It's so weird. Like Caleb McLaughlin, the kid who plays Lucas, he's been doing like publicity stuff all over the web, and he's got like facial hair and everything now, and it's just nuts.
Okay, I think we've gone along with the spoiler discussion. So is there anything else that we have not talked about that you guys want to address before we go?
It just dawned on me a second ago. You were talking about how will we see like that them go to Russia or something like that. And considering the way the upside down portals seem to work, there's a possibility that wouldn't be too difficult of them to maybe do that. So I wonder if that could be a thing where they go through the upside down and end up like in another location, and it primarily takes place somewhere completely different. But I don't know if they want to steer away from Hawkins or not.
So you're suggesting that season 4 could expand in scope to, I mean, have storylines going on around the world, I guess?
Maybe. Who knows? I mean, if it continues to grow in scope, I don't know. Maybe we'll get another wacky European vacation.
And you know what's going to happen by the time this series comes to an end, right? Is those kids, those other superpowered experimentees are going to come back into the story and factor in somehow. So maybe like Elle is going to lead an army of telepathic people to finally defeat this thing once and for all. And those characters that we hated so much in that one episode in season 2 are actually going to be like the people, the cavalry that rides in to save the day at the end of it all.
Please, God, no. No. Okay. If you have an idea of where Stranger Things 4 is headed, something that we didn't say on this podcast, please submit it to us at peter@slashfilm.com, and maybe we'll read it on the air in a future episode. You can find more of all of our work at slashfilm.com. You can find those articles I mentioned linked in the show notes. This podcast, Slash Film Daily, is published every weekday on iTunes, Google, Overcast, Spotify, all the popular podcast apps. Please head on over to our iTunes page. Give us a rating, give us a review, tell your friends, spread the word, and we'll see you tomorrow.